Good morning, Governor, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us during this incredibly challenging time for the nation, and including Michigan. So first, I would just love to hear your response to the protests that we're seeing going on against police brutality. In Michigan, it was even happening just in front of your office in the Capitol yesterday.
That's right. Right now in our country, there's a lot of pain, and you see it playing out all across America. We saw it playing out here in Michigan. And we're in the midst of a global pandemic that has disproportionately hurt communities of color. You layer onto that a 500-year flood that we had here in Michigan just a week and a half ago. And then this police brutality that we saw play out on camera in Minneapolis, that is so visceral. And as a mom, I can't even conceive of the pain that Black women and parents across America have every time their children or their spouse or any of their loved ones leaves the home. What happened to George Floyd was a crime, but for it being captured on video, we would not know his name. And yet we know this happens. It happens too often in the United States. This is historic pain that has come to this point and driven us to this point. And all of that being said, the protests have by the organizers have largely been peaceful. They're there for the legitimate, righteous reason of simply wanting to be treated equally under the law and safe in communities. And they're right, and I stand with them. I think that there are others who are using this moment to for their own agenda and undermining, the real spirit of what these demonstrations are about. And I think that's incredibly sad. And I think we have to be determined as a country to fix the underlying problem, to acknowledge the truth and righteousness of the pain that people are feeling, and to do better. And I think it all comes from who our leaders are. And that's why we have to organize into this moment, into a movement.
Now, you acknowledge the pain that a lot of people are feeling. How do you lead at a time like this when people are feeling such pain and injustice, racial injustice that they felt for hundreds of years? What is your message to the protesters?
Well, I think every one of us with a position who has the ability to live our values has a responsibility to understand as well as we can, recognizing that we'll never be able to fully walk in someone else's shoes, but to be smart enough and empathetic enough to hear, to listen, to understand, and then to make the change that people deserve and want to see in this country. It is on all of us, but it's also on us to empower communities of color, to ensure that their voices are a part of decision making and in positions of power. And that's what's so important. The Lieutenant Governor, Michigan's first African American Lieutenant Governor, and I have talked a lot about what we are confronting as a society, as a state, and where we need to be headed. And I'm grateful for leaders like Garland Gilchrist and the incredible people in my cabinet. It's the most diverse cabinet in our state's history, and yet we know that that's one step toward addressing this, but there's much work to do.
Do you or the Lieutenant Governor have any plans to join the protest yourself?
So I have, we've been in touch with protest organizers. I know that Garland was walking around in Detroit last night. I've been walking around in Lansing. I think that it's really important that we do show solidarity, but also that we not let this moment defeat us spiritually or intellectually, that we remember the power of being together and the lessons from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that if we want to be the change we deserve in this world, we have to show the kind of leadership that will drive that change.
So speaking of that leadership, on Saturday, there was a sheriff in Flint who joined the protesters, and this video kind of went viral. And you said it was an example for law enforcement. So what conversations are you having or have you been having with police chiefs to facilitate more of that kind of community engagement?
Yes, I've been working very closely with our mayor across the state who, are hire all their police chiefs. I've been working closely with the colonel of the state police, who is a part of my cabinet, as well as the adjutant general, who's the top person when it comes to our National Guard. We know that we have to live our values. And what we saw play out in Minneapolis is not just unacceptable, it's criminal. And everyone who was a part of it, meaning the other three officers as well, need to be held accountable for that. We also recognize that we need to uphold, highlight and uplift great examples of leadership, like the sheriff in Genesee County, who joined marchers and said, "We're going to make this into a parade," and they said, "Walk with us." I mean, it was a powerful moment, and I hope people see that, because there's so many examples where it's not working. There are examples where it is. I saw a picture of a number of police take a knee in honor of George Floyd and to speak out against police brutality. And I think those are powerful visuals that I hope people see too.
So just to be clear, you mentioned the other three officers who were involved in the incident. You think that they should be arrested and charged as well?
I do. I watched Keith Ellison, the Attorney General in Minnesota, this morning on the news say that they're doing their due diligence. And as a lawyer myself, I understand it's important to get it right. If you want to get a conviction, you got to get it right. And so I know that they're doing the due diligence. I have confidence in Keith Ellison and his office's ability to get justice. But understandably, everyone's feeling impatient and raw right now. And I think, it's important to recognize this one officer who we know has been charged also had three others who were right there with them. And whether they held George Floyd down or they stood there while this was happening, I think that all needs to be taken into account and they should be held accountable.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people have been critical of President Trump's reaction to the whole situation. A lot of people believe that he's making it worse. What's your take on how he's been behaving?
I think that in this time when this country has so much pain, it is so important that we have all leaders speaking to our mutual interests of hope and justice and security. And the fact that there's none of that coming out of the White House, the fact that not only that, but when you see some of these tweets, it's inflaming the situation is unconscionable. I really think that it's unconscionable.
I heard the president is holding a call with governors later today, governors and mayors, I believe, to discuss the ongoing protests. Are you invited to that call?
It's on my schedule, yes.
And what would you hope to hear from him, if anything, at this point?
My hope is always that they're going to get it right and they're going to acknowledge the legitimacy of the pain that people are feeling. That they are going to call upon all of our better angels to rise to this challenge and to make this country better than it is right now. That they're going to call for calm and make the kinds of investments that address historic inequities in our culture. That's my hope. Am I confident that's going to happen? I wish I could say that I was.
You mentioned how he's been describing the protesters, some of his tweets. What was your reaction when you saw that he called the armed, locked down protesters in Michigan, good people, hearkening back to Charlottesville and very fine people, but then he seemed to threaten violence against, anti-racist protesters going on the last couple of days?
Well, I can tell you this, as a governor of a state of 10 million people, the mass majority of the people in this state are doing the right thing. We have flattened our curve because of it. They're good people who've made real sacrifice in order to save other people's lives. And those pictures do not depict who we are here in Michigan. And yet, every one of us who has a platform has a responsibility to take actions that protect our people, that create opportunity, that call on people's best instincts, not fuel their worst fears. And that's precisely why, as I see the tweets come out that inflame the situation, it frankly infuriates me, because we are trying our best to save lives in this middle of this global pandemic. we're trying our best to make sure that people have the opportunity to demonstrate because they have a righteous point of view and they deserve to demonstrate however they want, so long as it's safe. And that's precisely what we're trying to do on the front line. And any effort to undermine that, I think, is unconscionable. It's the only word that I can use to describe it.
Are you worried about seeing a spike or a second wave of infections because of all the protests that are happening?
I am worried about it. I was worried about it during the protests against the stay home order. I'm worried about it anytime people are congregating because we know COVID-19 is still here. And COVID-19 is still spread from close contact. And that's why when I see people gathering without masks, yelling, projecting their voices, we know that's precisely how COVID-19 spreads. And that's a fear. I want people to be safe. I respect people's First Amendment rights. I support their right to demonstrate. But in the midst of a global pandemic, it's very, very concerning.
On Friday night, the Department of Justice, I think, announced that it was backing a lawsuit by 7 Michigan businesses against your COVID-related stay-at-home orders. Do you think that you are being targeted by the Trump administration in this sense?
The fact that they are weighing in is surprising and disappointing, frankly. And we're going to fight because I know that every action I've taken has been in the interest of saving lives in Michigan and has been on the right side of the law and within my executive powers. I'm not going to apologize for using every power at my fingertips to save lives. I'm always going to do that. That's what my job is. And so I was disappointed to see them weigh in, but it's not going to change. I'm not going to be bullied into changing the work that we're doing because we've saved lives and we're going to continue to do the next right thing.
Were you surprised at the pushback from Republicans and lawmakers in your own state when this started happening?
So it's not surprising in one realm, because as soon as the president started tweeting about me, the whole tenor changed, and it went from a public health crisis that is a threat to all of us to a partisan issue. And that's really when the tenor and here on the ground changed, was when those attacks started coming from the White House. And so I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed.
So you're saying the president had sort of a direct hand in your own pushback that you faced?
I'm just saying the timing matches up.
I've also noticed that he has a tendency to attack not only yourself, but Attorney General Dana Nessel and Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, and you all happen to be women, which I think is a pattern that we've seen. So what do you make of his often dismissive gendered attacks against you?
Well, I think that it's just a part of what the reality is that we're dealing with here. I can't tell you what's going on in the mind of what's behind these attacks. I can just share your observation that they are unique to us. I don't think that we've said anything different than our male counterparts across the country have, but we certainly have been treated differently. And you and your viewers can make their own assessment of why that is.
Now, I understand that it also escalated into death threats that you were facing during this time. So how did you deal with that personally? What was the real effect of that?
Well, I mean, it's very unfortunate. I've got 2 daughters, 16 and 18. The girls and my husband and I would look out the window and see the armed gunmen standing outside protesting me just outside of our residence. My girls have seen the violence and threats that our people are making online and that are covered in the newspapers. I mean, it's a sad part of the reality of this political climate that we are in right now. And the fact of the matter is, it's not going to change the work that I'm doing. I'm going to stay tethered to the science and to the facts and do the next right thing. I won't be bullied via tweet or protest or threat online into not doing what I know to be the right thing to do.
How would you grade the federal government's response to the pandemic?
That's a hard question to answer. There are some shortcomings, to be sure. The lack of a national strategy, the lack of a national procurement. The supply chain is still a problem across the country. No matter what the spin is, we don't have enough swabs, we don't have enough reagents. And the key to re-engaging an economy in a responsible way is testing. And so without those things, it's very difficult to have confidence that we're going to be safe from a second wave. And yet we know that people won't stay in the stay-home posture forever. And so if they could get their act together on that front, we'd be in a much stronger position as a nation. The inconsistent advice coming out of the White House has undermined our efforts as well. All of that being said, though, we have found FEMA to be great to work with. I will say that the vice president has been accessible and cordial. As a former governor, I think he has some understanding of the pressures that we are all confronting as governors. And so that's why I say it's a mixed bag. We've gotten some help and we're grateful for that. Could we do a lot more and protect a lot more lives as a nation with these types of improvements? Absolutely.
So you said the vice president has been accessible and cordial. So that seems to be despite the fact that Trump at one point told him not to speak to you, I believe.
You know, he's always been accessible. Despite that quip in a press conference, I've been able to get a hold of the vice president when I've needed to. And for that, I am grateful.
Now, I believe you're testifying to Congress tomorrow, or you're scheduled to testify to Congress tomorrow about the COVID-19 response in your state's budget shortfall in response to it. What happens if you don't get the federal money that you need in order to fill those gaps?
Well, like states across the country, if the federal government doesn't get this fourth supplemental passed, we are going to be in dire straits and having to make decisions that jeopardize the very things that are critical in the midst of a global pandemic: public health, public education, and public safety. Those make up the biggest parts of all of our state budgets. And the states, unlike the federal government, can't borrow money, can't, run deficits. We have to balance our budgets. And that's precisely why Republicans and Democrats, governors across the country, are imploring this U.S. Senate to get it going and to get it to the president's desk and to have him sign it. We need Mitch McConnell and the Republican-controlled U.S. Senate and the White House to get serious about this. They don't have to do exactly what the House did, although if they did, we'd all be pleased. But they need to do something. Otherwise, the people that have stayed on the front line and gotten us through this global pandemic will be the ones to pay the greatest price if we have to make these incredible cuts in our budgets. And they've been doing the right thing. It's COVID-19 that has devastated us, and that's why the federal government needs to step up and help us.
Now, Trump also threatened to pull funding from the state of Michigan in one of his Twitter rants, while you're also dealing with this extreme flooding from a dam failure that you mentioned earlier. So what was your response to seeing that? Are you worried? Is that an actual concern that you think you might be facing when asking for this money? Or do you think that was something else that he was just sort of saying to be critical?
I don't know. I think that he misinterpreted what the Secretary of State was doing, which was mailing out applications for absentee ballots. He weighed in that she was mailing out ballots. It was a fundamental lack of understanding of what she's doing. What she's doing is the same thing that's done in a lot of other states. Republican and Democratic secretaries of state who have this ability are doing this. And it's a good thing. We're making it easier for people to vote safely in the midst of a global pandemic. So that tweet, I didn't like seeing it, but I'm not sure that he's going to follow through. I'm not sure that he has the ability to legally to follow through. And so we're just going to continue to do the work.
Now, Michigan is a state that's extremely important to Trump electorally. It made a huge difference in 2016, even though he won it by a mere 10,000 votes. So do you think all of these threats, even if he doesn't follow through on them, and the attacks against you and other leaders are damaging his chances for winning Michigan in November?
Well, the thing about the people of Michigan is we don't conveniently all fit into one party or another. we're discerning voters. And frankly, when I ran in 2018, I won by almost 10 points, just 2 years after Donald Trump won by less than 11,000 votes. I never talked about Donald Trump on the campaign trail. I think over the course of that whole election, I had one ad that talked about healthcare and Donald Trump. Other than that, I didn't. I focused on the things that people need fixed, whether it's fixing the damn roads or improving our educational outcomes. Michiganders want leaders who are going to get these things done. And so all of this other, inflammatory stuff, I think is unfortunate. It creates a worse climate, and I don't think it's politically wise either. So, I mean, I just don't think that this helps, his cause here in Michigan.
It's been reported that you are on the short list of potential vice president candidates for Joe Biden, and that there have been some conversations about possibly joining the ticket. Are you currently being vetted for that right now?
I don't know. They've got a group that is doing this work. I can just tell you we had an initial conversation. I've been so focused. I've got my hands full managing my state in the midst of this global pandemic, and now in the midst of all of this angst around police brutality, that I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Many people say that they think Biden needs somebody from the Midwest on the ticket, and they want that to be you. So what do you say to those people?
I ran for this job for 2 years. I am, even on the hardest days, and there have been harder days than anyone could have imagined, I am grateful to be the governor of the state of Michigan. I'm going to stay focused doing this, every second, because we are a nation in crisis. I think Joe Biden is an excellent candidate for president. I've enthusiastically been supporting him since before the primary here in Michigan, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help him.
Governor Whitmer, thank you so much for your time, especially during this period. We really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.